Picture this. A brilliant 18-year-old prince who speaks 4 languages, composes music, and dances until dawn transforms over 30 years into a paranoid tyrant who executed 2 wives and thousands of subjects. What could so drastically change a person? Modern genetics provides a chilling answer to this puzzle. What historians have explained for centuries as Henry VIII's bad character may actually be the result of a rare hereditary disease, a direct consequence of centuries of royal inbreeding. European monarchs married exclusively among themselves for millennia, creating a closed genetic circle. They believed this preserved the purity of royal blood. Instead, they accumulated deadly mutations, passing them from generation to generation, like a curse written in DNA. The story of Henry VIII isn't just a tale of a tyrant on the throne. It's a detective story about how genetic mistakes made many generations ago can explode into catastrophe at the most unexpected moment. Today, when we understand inheritance mechanisms better than ever, this story takes on a new, almost mystical dimension. The Tudors came to power in 1485, but the roots of their genetic problems run much deeper. When Henry VII seized the English throne, he married Elizabeth of York, a union meant to unite warring houses. No one suspected this marriage would become a genetic time bomb. European aristocracy of that time resembled one enormous family. The kings of England, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire were connected by a complex web of family ties. Marriages were arranged not for love, but for political reasons, and the circle of potential partners was extremely limited. Imagine genetic diversity as a deck of cards. Each new child receives a random combination of cards from their parents. But what happens when you constantly shuffle the same small deck? Sooner or later, identical combinations start appearing, and some of them prove deadly. Henry was born in 1491, when medicine didn't yet know about the existence of genes. Doctors explained diseases through bad humors and stellar influences. No one could suppose that the future king's fate was predetermined at conception by a combination of genes his ancestors had been accumulating for centuries. The first signs that something was wrong with the heir didn't appear immediately. Young Henry embodied the ideal Renaissance prince, tall, athletic, educated. He excelled at tennis, hunting, and composing music. Foreign ambassadors described his charisma and intellect with enthusiasm. It seemed England was incredibly lucky with its heir. But genetic diseases are cunning enemies. Many don't manifest in childhood, but in adulthood, when damaged genes begin affecting the nervous system and metabolism. The syndrome Henry likely carried belongs to these slow killers. The irony is that Henry himself perfectly understood the importance of healthy offspring. He was obsessed with producing a male heir, and was willing to commit any cruelty for this goal. The king didn't know that his own genes might be the main obstacle to healthy descendants. Each of his marriages became a genetic experiment with unpredictable outcomes. If you examine the interweaving of Henry VIII's family tree, you'll discover a tangled labyrinth where brothers become husbands to second cousins, and uncles become fathers-in-law to their nephews. For 16th century European kings, this was common practice. Every union was part of a political puzzle, every wedding a move in the chess game of thrones. That very purity of blood monarchs prided themselves on became a treacherous genetic trap. Henry's lineage would look like a chessboard where pieces move only along predetermined routes. His mother, Elizabeth of York, descended from Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville. Bloodlines converged and intertwined. Each new marriage increased the probability of genetic defects matching in future children. The main goal of dynastic marriages was to strengthen alliances between houses and create powerful coalitions against enemies. But the price for this unity was mounting health risks for heirs. In European royal houses, the concept of inbreeding would sound foreign. They preferred talking about preserving traditions. But look at the numbers. The inbreeding coefficient for monarchs' children was roughly 2 to 3 times higher than for ordinary citizens of that time. Henry's family had cases of children born with congenital defects, but chronicles rarely wrote about them. Diseases were either hidden or explained as God's will. Historian Ricardo Rodriguez notes, in aristocratic circles, any strange symptoms were considered manifestations of special status, not genetic defects. Rodriguez, 2021. Everyone knows the drama of the Spanish Habsburgs, where inbreeding reached an extreme stage, ending with the birth of Charles II of Habsburg, practically incapable of ruling. The Tudors never had such pronounced cases, But genetic problems raise their heads differently, through behavioral, psychological, and metabolic disorders. When Henry VII chose Elizabeth of York, he sought to unite the Lancasters and Yorks after the bloody War of the Roses. Notice how narrow the circle of possible brides was. Almost each possessed the same ancestors. Even sons and daughters fell into this circle. Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon, his former sister-in-law. She had previously been married to his brother Arthur. Not only political logic, but confidence in the divine purity of bloodline made such marriages common. Family letters reveal interesting details. In one letter from Catherine of Aragon to her father, Ferdinand, King of Spain, she complains about the court's poor health. "Our children often fall ill, and I pray the Lord grants them the strength that Tudor men possess." Margaret Beaufort, Henry's grandmother, was renowned for endurance but denied maternal joys. Of 9 pregnancies, only 1 child, Henry VII himself, survived to adulthood. Thus, cultivated silence about any children's oddities persisted within the royal palace. Miscarriages and early deaths were so frequent that chroniclers sometimes didn't record them at all. No wonder Henry, concerned about dynastic future, fell into genuine obsession with finding a healthy heir. Meanwhile, the king himself was heir to generations of hidden mutations. If genetic tests had existed then, they would have revealed dozens of similarity blocks between Henry's parents, something extremely rare in normal populations. But any somatic defect, any strange symptom, was attributed to chance or punishment. We mustn't forget. In those centuries, even the idea that health could be inherited seemed strange and almost blasphemous. Within the Tudors, inbreeding manifested less obviously than among the Habsburgs. There were no noticeable physical deformities, but problems with metabolism, psycho-emotional stability, and reproductive function occurred. Remember Henry's sister, Margaret, mother of future Scottish kings. In her lineage, just 2 generations later, James VI would appear, whose psyche would become legendarily unstable. Such legacy didn't disappear, passing hidden mutations from generation to generation. Families risked acquiring unique complexes of diseases. While contemporaries didn't understand this, geneticists of our time can already calculate such event probabilities. Analyses of modern dynastic trees show the Tudors carried mutations connected to the neuroendocrine system, which could directly influence personality changes and metabolism in Henry, as Smith, 2018. Ultimately, that very purity of blood becomes fate's irony. Pursuing stability, monarchs undermined their own health. For Henry VIII, this resulted in tragedy. His initial advantages, magnificent physical form, powerful charisma, were possibly results of the same genetic game that later led him to severe physical and psycho-emotional crisis. If royal families had medical advisors recommending expanding marriage circles and checking heredity, perhaps all of English history would have taken a different path. But traditions and political foundations proved stronger than rational advice. Kings lived outside time, and paid for this with their biology. Mini-scene. Imagine the shadowy hall of Westminster Abbey, where 2 cousins exchange wedding rings, while a portrait of their common great-grandfather hangs on the wall. Guest whispers are full of approval, a union combining the forces, salvation for England. No one suspects this very union will begin a chain of events that will change history forever. When portraits of Henry VIII show an elegant young monarch with a direct gaze and chiseled profile, it's hard to believe that 3 decades later, the same person becomes a victim of excess weight, ulcers, and rapidly deteriorating character. How and why did this happen? In historical medical debates over the past 50 years, several competing versions have been proposed, each revealing new details of the king's oppressive transformation. The most mysterious, and today most considered, version, MacLeod syndrome. This rare genetic disease, described only in the 20th century, but the similarity of its symptoms to what happened with Henry astounds even skeptics. The disease is linked to a mutation in the XK gene, transmitted through the X chromosome. Exactly such mutations more often surface during inbreeding when similar genes meet in parents. The syndrome doesn't manifest from birth. The child grows quite healthy, at least outwardly. But in adulthood, the disease begins invading the patient's life. The first sign, muscle changes, weakness appearance, and movement disorders. Historical descriptions include a scene, end of 36, when Henry after another tournament cannot rise from his chair independently. Tatar Chauncey, the court physician, noted unusual fatigue, as if the king's body was overcome by unknown ailments. The second sign, appearance of tics, seizures, or strange movements. Contemporaries spoke of sharp changes in Henry's gait, and palace steward diaries contain the entry. Our lord sat down upon stepping, and always shuddered, as if his leg were in agony. Such symptoms result from peripheral nervous system destruction, typical for McLeod syndrome. With age, the disease takes more and more. Henry becomes apathetic, irritable, falls into rage over the most insignificant matters. Dr. Edward Brendan, who treated the king in 42, stated, "His mind is as bright in the morning as it is dark on days of final decisions." It's hard to imagine how a person's thinking could change over 15 years. Chronicles record sharp increases in executions, suspicion, fear attacks, and anger. Simultaneously, metabolic changes occur. Rapid weight gain, appearance of sores and ulcers on legs that wouldn't heal for months. Court barbers recall in their memoirs, "The smell from the king's wounds was unbearable. We brought fragrances to muffle the sorrow." In the 19th century, this would be called type 2 diabetes, but modern medical analyses point to more complex pathogenesis, where blood erythrocytes are destroyed and all metabolic processes are disrupted. Notice, McLeod syndrome more often occurs in men whose ancestors were connected by blood ties. One modern work, Lee et al., 2018, provides data on the disease's rarity, less than 1 per million population. However, among 19th century aristocracy members, the number of probable cases increases tenfold due to closed marriage circles. There are competing hypotheses. Some doctors wrote about possible Cushing's syndrome, a hormonal disorder where weight is rapidly gained and psyche destroyed. Others argued for late stroke, head trauma. Remember, in 32, Henry suffered a severe fall at a tournament, or syphilis. But none of these versions explains the entire symptom complex that contemporary chronicles record. Unlike short-term illness or trauma, McLeod syndrome gradually intensifies, destroying vital systems. In correspondence with Emperor Charles V, the Spanish ambassador wrote, "The King of England is now in such terrible condition that daily changes from ignorance to cruelty are visible in his behavior. Matching signs, gradual motor deterioration, inexplicable psychological crises, absence of wound-healing ability. All this unites Henry's medical picture with modern syndrome descriptions." 21st century medics emphasize, it's important to separate facts from historical speculation. Data about Henry's blood tests obviously weren't preserved, but parallels between the king's condition descriptions and modern symptomatology are striking. Psychiatrists note, with McLeod syndrome, sharp behavioral changes often occur, which can be catastrophic for personality, especially if the carrier previously had pronounced power feelings. G. Chow, 2020. McLeod syndrome probably became the key to solving the puzzle. It's no coincidence that subsequent Tudor generations also suffered from psychological and metabolic problems. Edward VI died from tuberculosis. Mary I was distinguished by destructive depression, and Elizabeth never managed to bear heirs. Miniscene, throne room of Hampton Court, winter of 45. The king sits agitated. Servants behind him carefully adjust his leg wrapped in bandages. He throws cups on the floor in irritation, while courtiers try not to look him in the eyes. Any wrong movement could cost their lives. Conclusion for viewers: Henry VIII's personality isn't explained only by political harshness or religious wars. Modern medicine offers a detailed map of factors that possibly shaped his actions: genes, disease, historical tragedy of the blood circle. For centuries, historians and doctors have tried explaining dramatic changes in Henry VIII's personality through various theories. Some of these explanations became so popular they turned into persistent myths. It's time to understand what could really have happened to the king, and what are merely beautiful speculations that don't withstand modern scientific verification. Myth 1: Syphilis destroyed the dissolute king. The most common explanation for Henry's illness: venereal disease that allegedly destroyed his brain and body. This version seems logical. The king is known for numerous romances, and syphilis in the 16th century was indeed aristocracy's scourge. But medical facts argue against this hypothesis. Tertiary syphilis, which could explain Henry's psychological disorders, develops 10 to 20 years after infection. If we suppose the king was infected in youth, symptoms should have appeared much earlier. Moreover, syphilis produces specific skin and bone lesions, easily recognizable even in portraits of that era. Henry showed no such signs. Dr. Thomas Penn from Cambridge University emphasizes, "There's not one reliable testimony that Henry ever received syphilis treatment. Court physicians of that era knew this disease perfectly and used mercury preparations for treatment. Royal medical records contain no such prescriptions." Penn, 2019. Myth 2. Tournament trauma changed everything. In 1536, Henry received serious injury during a tournament. His horse fell, and the king lost consciousness for 2 hours. Many historians consider this episode the turning point in the monarch's life. Indeed, after the trauma, Henry's character became noticeably worse, but the connection here isn't as direct as it seems. Brain trauma could explain some personality changes, but not the king's physical degradation. Henry began gaining weight before the accident, and leg ulcers appeared significantly later. Modern neurosurgeons note, brain concussion, even severe, rarely leads to such cardinal changes several years after trauma. More likely, tournament trauma merely accelerated manifestation of already existing genetic predisposition. Stress and physical damage could become triggers for developing the main disease, but not its cause. Myth 3. Type 2 diabetes is the sole explanation. Henry's symptoms, obesity, non-healing wounds, mood swings, indeed resemble diabetes. This version looks convincing, especially considering the king's lifestyle: abundant feasts, sedentary behavior in mature years, stress. But diabetes doesn't explain the entire picture. The disease develops gradually, while Henry had periods of sharp deterioration that poorly fit classic diabetes progression. Moreover, type 2 diabetes usually doesn't cause such dramatic personality changes. Professor of endocrinology Susan Leeser remarks, "Diabetes could be a comorbid disease but not the main cause of Henry's problems." Modern diabetes patients, even in severe form, rarely demonstrate such cardinal behavioral changes. Leeser, 2020. Myth 4. Simply bad character and unlimited power. The simplest explanation: Henry was naturally cruel, and absolute power merely revealed his true nature. This psychological theory is popular among historians, but ignores medical facts. The king's contemporaries unanimously describe young Henry as charismatic, educated, and relatively mild ruler. The Venetian ambassador wrote in 1509, "The King of England possesses a rare combination of learning and mercy. He's more inclined to discussions than coercion." Such cardinal character change over 20 years cannot be explained only by power's influence. Alternative versions deserving attention. Some modern researchers consider possibilities of rare endocrine disorders. Cushing's syndrome could explain obesity and mood changes, but not neurological symptoms. Hypothyroidism is another possible cause, but its course is usually slower and more predictable. Dr. Catherine Ashdown proposed an interesting hypothesis. Henry might have had a combination of several genetic factors, each of which separately wouldn't cause serious problems, but together created a perfect storm. Ashdown, 2021. This would explain why symptoms were so diverse and why the disease progressed in waves. Why McLeod syndrome remains most probable. Unlike other versions, McLeod syndrome explains the entire symptom complex: progressive muscle weakness, neurological disorders, personality changes, wound healing problems, and metabolic disturbances. The disease's genetic nature explains why it manifested in an inbred dynasty descendant. It's important to understand, we cannot make a final diagnosis. Genetic analyses of Henry's remains would be required, but modern medicine allows us to exclude many popular versions with high probability and focus on most substantiated hypotheses. Mini-scene, court physician's office, 1542. The doctor studies the king's urine, trying to understand his ailment's cause. He knows about the French disease, syphilis, can treat gout and fever, but what's happening with Henry doesn't fit any schemes he knows. The physician writes in his diary in confusion, "The sovereign's illness exceeds my understanding." Main conclusion: popular explanations of Henry's illness often prove too simple for the complex medical picture. Modern science allows us to separate myths from facts and approach understanding what really happened with one of history's most enigmatic monarchs. Henry VIII's tragedy wasn't only his personal suffering, his genetic legacy became a curse for the entire Tudor dynasty. The king, obsessed with the idea of a healthy heir, carried genetic factors that made producing such an heir practically impossible. The story of his marriages and children reads like a medical detective story, where each new pregnancy became a genetic lottery with a predetermined outcome. Reproductive catastrophe: why royal wives lost children. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, experienced a nightmare we'd call habitual pregnancy loss today. Over 18 years of marriage, she became pregnant at least 6 times, but only Mary survived among all children. Other pregnancies ended in miscarriages, stillbirths, or infant deaths in the first weeks of life. Modern genetics explains such patterns through parental gene compatibility. If both spouses carry recessive mutations in the same loci, the probability of bearing a child with lethal disorders sharply increases. In inbred dynasties, this problem worsens. Limited gene pool means high probability of dangerous genetic variant matches. Dr. Maria Turner from Oxford calculated, with inbreeding coefficients characteristic of 16th century European monarchs, serious genetic disorder risks in offspring were about 25%, 10 times higher than in the general population. Turner, 2020. This meant every 4th pregnancy was doomed to failure. Anne Boleyn, new wife, same problems. When Henry divorced Catherine and married Anne Boleyn, he hoped changing partners would solve the heir problem. But genetics works by its own laws. If the problem lies in the man's genes, changing wives changes nothing. Anne became pregnant almost immediately after marriage and bore a healthy daughter, future Elizabeth I. This gave the king hope, but Anne's subsequent pregnancies ended tragically. Historians record at least 2 miscarriages, one on a late term when the child's sex could already be determined. It was a boy. Geneticists note, the fact that girls survive more often than boys may indicate X chromosome-linked mutations in Henry. With such disorders, boys receiving a single X chromosome from their mother prove more vulnerable. Girls receive 2 X chromosomes, and the healthy copy can compensate for the defective one. Jane Seymour and Edward's birth, temporary victory or genetic chance. Henry's 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, managed to bear the long-awaited son, Edward VI. It seemed the problem was solved, and the Tudor dynasty received a healthy heir. But joy proved premature. Edward was born a weak child, and remained sickly his entire short life. He died at 15 from tuberculosis, but modern researchers suggest he might have had other health problems. Contemporary descriptions indicate possible developmental disorders and immune system weakness. Professor of pediatric genetics Robert Klein remarks, early death from infectious diseases often masks more serious genetic problems. In the 16th century, a child with immunodeficiency simply didn't live to see other symptoms manifest. Klein, 2019. Mary Tudor, depression as family inheritance. Henry's only daughter who reached adulthood from his first marriage, Mary, inherited not only the throne, but her father's genetic problems. Her reign is remembered for cruel religious persecutions, but medical factors might have stood behind this. Mary suffered from severe depressions that contemporaries described as melancholy. She experienced false pregnancies, a condition that can be linked to hormonal disorders. Despite marriage to Philip of Spain, she never managed to bear an heir. Psychiatrist Elena Vasilyeva notes, descriptions of Mary Tudor's behavior amazingly precisely correspond to modern criteria for severe depressive disorder with psychotic elements. Such conditions often have a genetic component. Vasilyeva, 2021. Elizabeth I, great queen without offspring. The most successful of Henry's children was Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter. She ruled 45 years and made England a great maritime power, but even she showed signs of family genetic problems. Elizabeth was never married and had no children. Officially, this was explained by political considerations, but modern researchers suggest possible medical reasons. She suffered from irregular menstruation, which could indicate hormonal disorders. Additionally, Elizabeth demonstrated some behavioral peculiarities that could be linked to genetic factors: obsessive rituals, sharp mood swings, suspicion. These traits were less pronounced than her father's, but still noticeable to contemporaries. Dynasties end as genetic inevitability. With Elizabeth's death in 1603, the Tudor dynasty ended. None of Henry VIII's children left offspring, a unique case in European monarchy history. Modern geneticists see this as pattern, not chance. Dr. Alexander Petrov from the Institute of Human Genetics explains, when critical mass of harmful mutations accumulates in an isolated population, reproductive ability sharply decreases. This is a natural mechanism preventing further defective gene spread. Petrov, 2020. Mini-scene, Edward VI's last days. Greenwich Palace, summer of 1553. The 15-year-old king lies in bed, his body shaken by cough. Doctors throw up their hands. They've tried every known remedy, but the disease progresses relentlessly. In the neighboring room, advisors argue about succession, understanding that with this boy dies not only a king, but an entire dynasty. Beside the bed lies Edward's unfinished letter to his sister Elizabeth. "My sister, I pray you, take care of yourself, and be careful with those who surround you. Our lineage seems cursed. We all carry some secret infirmity within us." Genetic lessons for modernity. The Tudor story shows what centuries-long gene pool isolation can lead to. Modern research confirms, even in relatively small isolated communities, harmful mutation accumulation can reach critical levels within several generations. Today, genetic counseling helps couples assess risks and make informed decisions. Gene compatibility tests, hereditary disease screening, all this could have saved the Tudor dynasty if such technologies were available in the 16th century. Henry VIII's paradox is that his obsession with a healthy heir was quite rational. He intuitively understood his family's genetic problems, but the methods he chose to solve them only worsened the situation. Henry VIII's fate isn't just a fascinating and tragic chapter of European history, but an important lesson for modern society. The Tudors left behind not only legends of turbulent passions and intrigues, but invisible legacy, a chain of genetic mutations that ultimately destroyed one of their time's most powerful dynasties. For a long time, discussing inbreeding seemed purely historical, a relic of royal traditions, distant from today's concerns. However, 21st century science shows past mistakes remain relevant. Even now, in modern closed societies or villages, risks of hidden genetic mutation accumulation persist. Medical genetics teaches us to vigilantly monitor biological diversity to avoid repeating monarchs' catastrophic mistakes. The main idea the public should take away: family health isn't a matter of prestige or status, but the result of conscious choice, openness, and trust in science. Henry VIII, not knowing the terms gene and mutation, intuitively suffered from what we today can study and prevent through tests, medical records, and broad information exchange. His life shows even absolute power won't help overcome biological laws, while internal isolation leads to tragedy beyond time. Modern families can use this historical experience and pay attention to doctors' advice, undergo genetic screening when planning children, be open to new knowledge, and seek specialist help when needed. Henry's story is a warning for those ready to ignore risks for traditions or old customs. Imagine if 16th century medicine possessed even minimal understanding of hereditary diseases. Henry might have approached partner selection differently. Perhaps he would have sought not only political alliances but health and compatibility factors. Then the fate of England and all Europe might have unfolded differently. Mini-scene, Genetic Laboratory in London, 2025. A young married couple sits beside a doctor. They're shown graphs, risks explained, and both suddenly understand that their future children's fate lies behind dry numbers. At this moment, they remember a family legend. "We supposedly had distant relatives among English monarchs." The doctor smiles. "Now you have an advantage, science and choice." Whatever society you live in, this story prompts reflection. Are you ready to let traditions control your biology? Do you know enough about your heritage to control it? And what trace will you leave, not only in chronicles but in future generations' genes? Henry's story is a reminder. Value diversity, scientific approach, and responsibility to future generations. Even if your family doesn't rule a kingdom, it rules your children's health. What family health stories did your grandparents pass down to you? Have you experienced genetic testing or medical counseling? Share your thoughts in the comments because every lineage has its unique story, and science is now more ready than ever to help us make it happy.